Just hours before Air Force One touches down in Beijing, a carefully drawn set of limits has been made plain. China's embassy in Washington put 4 explicit red lines on the table: Taiwan, democracy and human rights, political systems and development paths, and what Beijing calls China's right to development. Those 4 phrases are not abstract policy language. They are the boundaries Beijing says must not be crossed if the summit between the leaders of the world's 2 largest economies is to proceed without crisis. This visit is high stakes in the literal sense. 2 presidents who have remade the tenor of the relationship in recent years are meeting at a moment when diplomacy, economics, and military posturing collide. On one axis sits Taiwan, the single issue Beijing repeatedly calls the most sensitive and critical in China-U.S. relations. On others sit trade, sanctions, technology controls, and a war in the Middle East that has pulled Russia, Iran, and regional partners into an ever more dangerous orbit. The signals coming out of Beijing are direct. What China regards as its internal affairs, Hong Kong, Taiwan, the political model itself, are off limits to external interference. For Washington, the calculus is different. The 2 capitals define national interest and international order in irreconcilable ways on some of these questions. At the center of that tension is Taiwan. Beijing insists Taiwan is an inseparable part of China and views foreign military support for Taipei as interference and a direct provocation. That is not diplomatic shorthand. As China's leader has said in public and private, if Beijing judges it necessary, it will forcibly prevent Taiwan's formal independence. The prospect and the rhetoric animate capitals from Tokyo to Canberra and shape U.S. defense posture across the Western Pacific. For the United States, the balance has been to assert support for Taiwan's self-defense without endorsing formal independence. For China, any tie. Loyalty toward arms sales or diplomatic recognition of the island by other countries is a red line. President Trump traveled to Beijing, declaring a personal rapport with Xi Jinping, and he framed the trip as an opportunity to talk frankly about a range of issues. Speaking to reporters before departure, he said, in part, "We're going to have a long talk about it." I think he's been relatively good, to be honest with you. He's been a friend of mine. He's been somebody that we get along with. Those words are notable because they set a tone for the encounter: transactional, personal, and calibrated toward getting things done. Iran and the war in the Middle East loom large in the background of this meeting. President Trump explicitly said he would raise the conflict with Xi, but he also insisted he did not need Beijing's help to resolve the fighting. No, I don't think we need any help with Iran. We'll win it one way or the other. We'll win it peacefully or otherwise, he told R. E-porters, before adding a grim tally, they've killed a lot of people. They've killed 42,000 people, at least, over the last month and a half. Those are forceful and inflammatory formulations presented as the president's personal assessment of the conflict's toll and the prospects for victory. Washington has accused China of continuing commercial ties to Tehran, including purchases of sanctioned oil and alleged transfers of technology that could assist Iran's military efforts. Over the past year, the United States has sanctioned a Chinese refinery and a number of Chinese companies alleged to have traded in Iranian oil. U.S. authorities have also moved to blacklist a set of Chinese satellite companies, accusing them of supplying data that could assist Tehran. Beijing has consistently rejected those accusations. Chinese officials say the claims lack legal basis and that unilateral sanctions harm legitimate business activity. At a regular press briefing, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Guo Jiakun defended Chinese enterprises and denounced extraterritorial sanctions, saying, "We will firmly protect the legitimate rights and interests of Chinese businesses." He accused critics of levying groundless accusations and reiterated China's opposition to sanctions outside the mandate of the UN Security Council. The result is a diplomatic minefield. For President Trump, the argument is straightforward: curtail Iran's capacity to project force, restrict Iran's ability to finance and supply proxies, and squeeze the sources of oil and revenue that sustain the war effort. For Beijing, The calculus is often framed more narrowly around economic access and legal norms, an insistence that Chinese companies should not be punished for legitimate commerce, and that diplomacy and stability are better served by negotiation than by unilateral coercion. Trade is the other axis where expectations are high. Both governments emphasize mutual benefit as the essence of the economic relations. If behind the scripted language lies a deep interdependence, supply chains that stretch across continents, commodity flows that affect global prices, and market access that determines corporate fortunes. President Trump predicted a positive economic outcome from the visit, telling reporters it's going to be a positive, we're going to have a very good meeting. He signaled that for him, trade will likely top the agenda, tariffs, market access for U.S. companies, and protectionist legislation that has battered bilateral commerce in recent years. Yet trade talks do not occur in a vacuum. Technology restrictions, export controls, and concerns about national security are entangled with market grievances. Over the last several years, both sides have tightened rules on the transfer of semiconductors, artificial intelligence tools, and critical components. Those moves have domestic political rationales, protecting jobs, protecting intellectual property, but they also have strategic aim. Send slowing rivals' access to advanced systems that could alter military balances. Any summit that aims to stabilize the economic relationship must therefore bridge not only tariff and investment disputes, but also questions about how, on what terms, and to whom technology flows. Then there is Hong Kong and the person at the center of the international controversy, Jimmy Lai, the pro-democracy media tycoon whose arrest and prosecution have become a touchstone in the broader debate over Hong Kong's freedoms. The Chinese authorities have characterized Lai as a destabilizing figure, alleging he was involved in anti-China activities in the city. Beijing's posture is that Hong Kong affairs are internal matters and that its judicial authorities are carrying out their responsibilities in accordance with Chinese law. Critics in Washington and Brussels, Lai's case exemplifies a pattern of eroding civic freedoms and judicial independence in the territory, to Beijing calling out outside government. So the amounts to interference, the list of red lines and the divergent narratives around them make the meeting between these two leaders more than a protocol exercise. It is a contest over norms, who gets to define sovereignty, what counts as aggression, how much political pluralism a system must tolerate before it becomes a matter of foreign concern. Those are not philosophical debates in a conference room. They are arguments about mapping the future of international order, about whether the rules that governed the post-Cold War era remain in force or whether a new alignment of interests, power, and technology will establish a different equilibrium. Oil and markets are the more immediate, tangible stakes. Analysts and traders watch summits for signs of thaw or escalation because even modest policy shifts can ripple through commodity markets. President Trump suggested the meeting could reduce price pressure. It's going to be a positive. We're going to have a very good meeting, he say. Yet the war in the Middle East and sanctions regimes have already tightened global oil markets. Any disruption or heightened rhetoric could push prices higher. Conversely, a coordinated diplomatic step toward de-escalation, be it an agreement to enforce naval blockades differently, to reopen certain trade channels, or to constrain shipments that finance conflict, could ease supply concerns and lower prices. For many countries, the calculus is immediate. Energy costs feed inflation, shipping costs alter manufacturing margins, and currency markets react in real time to signs of geopolitical risk. Beyond the macro variables, the visit is a human story of diplomacy. Two leaders, each with their own domestic political pressures, will meet in a palace of protocol and theater. Both come with constituencies who expect tangible returns, jobs and wages for one, national dignity and strategic advantage for the other. Personal chemistry between heads of state can matter. It can open doors, does now paper over deep disagreements, but it cannot substitute for policy instruments and enforcement mechanisms. Trust is necessary, but it is rarely sufficient. There are also symbolic signals. Beijing's explicit public delineation of red lines is itself a signal to other capitals that China intends to present a coherent front on what it views as core interests. The insistence on the one China principle, the defense of Hong Kong's legal proceedings, and the forceful rejection of unilateral sanctions are part of a narrative Beijing is constructing about sovereignty, development, and its place in the international order. The wheels of history will not wait for any country, China's officials declared in recent remarks, warning that departing from the one China principle risks international isolation. That rhetoric carries a warning. The diplomatic price for crossing these limits could be steep. What to watch then in the hours and days after the meeting? First, the readouts from both sides. Will the statements be narrowly crafted, emphasizing mutual understandings on trade and cooperation? Or will they attempt to reconcile even in micro steps on security issues such as Iran and communications surveillance? Second, any agreements on trade must be accompanied by verification mechanisms or concrete follow-through to settle investor nerves. Third, watch for adjustments in sanctions lists, export controls, or tariff policies. Those will signal whether the summit produced durable progress or merely temporary goodwill. Finally, monitor actions in regional hotspots, military exercises, arms transfers, and diplomatic shifts in allies' positions in Asia and beyond. Deeds, not just words, will reveal the meeting's real impact. This trip is a test of whether two very different models, one that elevates centralized political control and a defined set of non-negotiable national interests, and another that presents open markets and democratic norms as integral to global state, ability can find pragmatic points of contact. There's also a reckoning over whether bilateral engagements between great powers can still manage global challenges like wars that ripple across continents, or whether fracture and competition will define the next era. There is finally a lesson about modern diplomacy itself. It is simultaneously public and private. Much of what matters will be hashed out in closed-door discussions, side meetings, and signals sent through interlocutors and ministries. Yet the public will read the visit through the lens of sound bites, press conferences, and Twitter threads. In such an environment, precision matters both in what is promised and what is qualified. Words like red line and friend and we will firmly protect are not just rhetoric. They are instruments that shape expectations and constrain future choices. The leaders will leave the same earth, but the world they return to will have reacted. Markets will price the perceived balance between cooperation and conflict. Allies and rivals alike will test the outlines of any new understandings. And ordinary people, from exporters to families watching fuel bills, will feel the consequences in the weeks and months ahead. At its best, diplomacy can turn confrontation into managed competition and avert crises before they become wars. At its worst, it can paper over unresolved conflicts only to let them resurface later with higher costs. This summit will not settle every disagreement, but it may set the terms for how those disagreements are handled in the short term, whether through renewed dialogue and calibrated restraint or through firmer, more entrenched confrontation. As the presidents meet, the world will be watching to see whether the carefully stated red lines remain lines that define limits or whether they will be redrawn in the negotiating room. Either way, the shape of the global order will be in play, and the choices made in these next hours will reverberate far bay. On the gilded halls where leaders exchange pleasantries and pledges,